So we're on Daf Gimel here in the introduction to Niddah, and we're up to, on the right column, Os Beis, Tvilas HaNiddah. So we've been discussing first the Torah Shebachsav of Niddah, and then we jumped over to a Hefsek Ara, a Bedika. When exactly should she make that Bedika? And what if an event she did not make the Bedika and then she waited a few days and she might become a Zava Gedola because it was a 3-day gap between the end of Hazayin, Yemei Niddah, and her Bedika. And now we want to talk about the Tefillah itself. Ein HaNiddah ola mitumasa chetitbol b'mikvah kosher. And he quotes a Rambam that the source for Tefillah and Niddah is a pasuk v'rochatzu b'mayim, which the Rambam defines as a binyan av l'chol tameh. So in other words, there's no specific source in the Torah for the requirement of Tefillah and Niddah, but rather it's derived from a generic requirement in all tumahs, that every tumah that we know of, it says v'rochatzu b'mayim, it requires Tefillah. Tosfos, on the other hand, quotes one of the Gaonim, Rav Yehuda Gaon, this is Tosfos in Masechet Yoma, that the source for Tefillah Niddah is within the parsha of Niddah itself. Because the Torah says about a Niddah, mishkava, if somebody has contact with a couch and the Niddah is on the couch, so the couch is holding up her weight, and we said before that Niddah is metame b'mishkav, and the Torah says that hanogeh b'mishkav tzarich tefillah. Now, what about the Niddah herself? So Tosfos in Masechet Yoma comes over the Kal V'chomer. Madach, if someone who's nogeh b'mishkav needs tefillah, let's go back to the source itself. What makes mishkava tamei? That it could be mitame mishano geb mishkava. It's got to be the Niddah itself. So if someone who's tamei b'mishkava, which is a derivative of the Niddah, he needs tefillah, how much more so does the Niddah herself need tefillah? So again, just to summarize, whereas the Rambam says that tefillah and Niddah has no source other than the fact that there's a binyan av in all tmeim of v'rochatzu b'mayim, nothing specific in the case of Niddah, in the parsha of Niddah. Tosfos, on the other hand, has something in the parsha of Niddah that leads to a Kal V'chomer. It's interesting, in certain areas, Kal V'chomer is useless. Like we have a principle called Ein Onshim Min Adin. So if you have, let's say, a man has a relationship with his half sister, so the Torah says he gets kares. What about a man who has a relationship with his full sister? It's both of the Ima. So the Gemara says, Kal V'chomer, how much more so he should get kares? So the Gemara says, no, he don't should be. But I guess if we're deriving halachas in Tara and how a Tommy is mitayr himself, then we can apply the principle of Kal V'chomer. Now he quotes Rabbeinu Tam that the source of the requirement of tefillah in the case of a Niddah is a pasuk in Bamidbar Lamed Aleph, Bimei Niddah Yischata, which is very interesting. That parsha is a parsha of Taras Tomei Mes. Right? The Tomei Mes needs what we call Hazah. He needs Hazah on the 3rd day and the 7th day with Mei Niddah. So why does the Torah use the word Mei Niddah to refer to this concoction, which is called Mei Chatas? So that's Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Ayin Hey. Darshu bo chacham matam lo b'mei Niddah mayim sheniddah tovel espan. Havi omer aboim sa. Beautiful. That when we create this concoction called mechatos for the purpose of hazah on a Tomei Mes, the Torah tells us that the volume of the mayim in this concoction has to be arboim sa, And how do we know that? Because the Torah calls it May Niddah. And May Niddah means that our Arbaim Sa is the volume of water that you need for a Niddah to be Tovelas. Brilliant. I mean, I would wonder why the Rambam and Tosfos shied away from this answer of Rabbi Tam. It seems so convincing because the Torah is telling you that the Mei Chatas has to be Mayim She'anida Tovelas by him. So you see clearly that a Niddah needs tefillah. Let me just think for a minute. What would be the, if you wanted to puncture a hole in this balloon of Rabbeinu Tam, what would be the weak point? The Mokam HaTurfa here in Rabbeinu Tam. I guess he's saying that this drasha, those who don't accept Rabbeinu Tam, this drasha it's not a drasha gemura. It's only based on a diuk as to why the Torah chose to use the phrase niddah in this context. But it doesn't say in the pasuk that a niddah requires tefillah. That's certainly not explicit in the pasuk. It's only once you have the drasha, then by inference you derive the conclusion that a niddah needs tefillah. Now he quotes another pshat. Shemakar din tefillah min hakasav ve'hadava b'niddah sa. Darshu bo chacham gemar Shabbos b'niddah sa tehei ad shetavo b'mayim. Okay. Now we get back to tefillas niddah. Eino milel shmini ve'elach. Eino elach, excuse me. Milel shmini ve'elach. So this is what I mentioned this as a hypothesis yesterday, that already the night going into the 8th day, assuming she made the hefsek tar at the end of the 7 days, she could be tovelos. The Eini Yechol Litpol B'Yom HaShvi. We don't apply the principle of Mixas Hayom Kekulo. Here's another difference between Zava and Nid. In the case of a Zava, I'm talking about a Zava Gedola, she goes to the mikvah on Yom Shvi. She doesn't have to wait till nightfall going into the 8th day. But in the case of a Niddah, there's no such thing as Tefillah before the end of the 7th day period. During the 7th day period, let's say even on Yom Shvi, we will not recognize the validity of a Tefillah. V'chein shanina b'braisa, Gemara Pesachim, kol chayvei tefillos tefillosam bayom, with the exception of Niddah v'yoledes shetefillosam balayla. So with regard to all Tmeim who require tefillah, tefillah has to be by day. The only two exceptions are Niddah and Yoledes, and they have the opportunity of tefillah balayla. Tisanya yochel tehei tovelas mibodyo, and the Torah is saying that she's in a state of niddah for all 7 days, meaning to the exclusion of tefillah. She can't go to the mikvah during that 7 day period, even towards the end of the 7 days.
The Ziva can go on the 7th day, but we have to wait till nighttime to be taller.
Correct. She needs what's called Erev Shemesh, but she can be tovelas by day. By the way, lahalacha l'maisa, I'm not, what I say is, with limited liability, we don't encourage tefillah by day for various reasons. But there are situations that are very extreme. It happened even during COVID, that they allowed tefillah during the day. And they went back to the Doraisa law that recognized tefillah by day on the 7th day of her, or they would only be matter her to her husband at night, but she could go to the mikveh during the day. That doesn't apply to a need. It could apply to a need in the 8th day. But let's say she didn't go to mikveh, and the night following the 7th into the 8th, she could go to the mikveh on the 8th day. But again, Even that we discourage, but when necessary, we'll allow. What we call b'shas adchak. Oh, I see Ruben is here. I haven't seen you in a while.
I'm here. I just got back.
Wow, how you doing?
Fine.
How was your trip?
It was good. It was good.
You mostly in Passaic?
Yeah, in Muncie.
Muncie.
Right.
So Rabbosai, here's the problem. I'm not so sophisticated of doing what they call screen sharing or even what's called scanning and then send you the text with a scan in an email. So I apologize for that. You know, with me, learning new tricks is like jumping into a cold mikvah. You know, so you go in your toes first. So I now am the owner, a proud owner of a scanner. I mean, that took a good couple of months. Now I have to learn how to use it, you know. So what we're doing is we finished the Hakdama to Masechet Tmura in the Masifta. Now we're doing the Hakdama to Masechet Niddah in the Masifta, which we started just at the beginning of this week. We're up to Tfilas Niddah. No problem on a Daraisa level if she delays her tefillah from the night of the 8th, the night meaning the night before the 8th, oral Shmini, till the day of Shmini. However, Tiknu Chachamim, Shegam Tfilas Hanida, Shelo Bizmana, Lo Tei El B'Layla. Meaning that the Zman of Tefillah is the night after the 7th going into the 8th. The day already is Shelo Bizmana. And the Rabbanan are going to say that even Tefillah Shelo Bizmana requires Laila, which means you'll have to wait till after the 8th day to the night going into the 9th day. Why? Mishum Srach Bita. The reason why the Chacham were afraid of allowing a Niddah to go into mikvah on the day is because of Srach Bita. Now watch what goes on here. Bita, her daughter, is watching her mother to learn what we call Shibush Talmidei Chachamim, to learn when, you know, with the laws of Niddah. She, the boss, doesn't realize when our mother checks out to the mikvah on the day of the 8th, that it's the day of the 8th. In her mind, she mistakenly assumes that it's the day of the 7th. This is in the old days when we learn halacha by watching our parents. Today it's a little bit more complicated because even our parents might not know the halacha. She mistakenly thinks this is the 7th day. She doesn't know exactly, you know, what the calculations were. When she gets older and she gets married, she's going to follow in the footsteps of her mother. My mother went to mikvah on the day of the 7th. I'm going to go to mikvah on the day of the 7th. Right? A tefillah in the case of a niddah on the 7th day is nothing. It's worthless. She still remains a niddah, not only linyan tuva v'tara, but also linyan isa l'bayla, which is an isa kares. Because be'isha al tumas nidasa lo sikravu v'nichrusu anefesh hazeh, because bias niddah is a doraisa and a chiv kares. And she thinks that you can go to mikvah on the 7th day. Now again, part of this has to do with what Steve was mentioning before about a zava. A zava who's counting Zayin Nikiyim, because she saw 3 re'iyos during Yemei Ziva, she could go to mikvah on the 7th day. So it's not like this girl is inventing something, you know, from the moon that doesn't exist within the world of halacha. It certainly does exist. So when she sees her mother going to mikvah on the day of the 8th, she doesn't know it's the day of the 8th. She thinks mistakenly thinks it's the day of the 7th. Nevuah b'Gemara. שבזמן שיש צורך גדול, שתטבול ביום ולא בלילה. Oh, look at that. I didn't know he would spell this out. And this happened during Corona. Women during Corona were afraid to go to mikveh at night. Because in addition to all the other fears about, night and so forth and so on, there was additional fears about the hygienic, cleanliness, so to speak, of the mikveh. Maybe the woman who went into the mikveh before her who had corona and so forth and so on. So under certain circumstances, they would allow a woman to go to mikveh during the day. So that would mean that after the 7 days, instead of going to mikveh the night of the 8th, she will go to mikveh on the 8th day itself. Only because the Shasatcha, according to the strict letter of the law, she would be going to mikveh at night. And not only would she be going to mikveh at night, she would be going at the night of the 8th, not waiting until the morning. It's interesting. Supposing, I don't want to talk about myself. Let's say Reuven is Tomei, Ichveis, he's a Mitzorah. I don't know. There's nothing compelling him to be Mitar himself. I mean, again, obviously there's psychological reasons why he wants to do so. But halachically, he remained Tomei. A man touches a sheretz. He can remain a Tomei for the rest of his life if he's stupid enough to do so. But nothing presses him. But in the case of Niddah, we have a principle called Tefillah B'zman Mitzvah. Mitzvah means it's urgent. If not for Shasat Chak, she would certainly want to go to the mikveh the night of the 8th. V'nechlechu tanoim im Tefillah B'zman Mitzvah she'ena mitzvah shetia b'zmano v'yachola lahamtin militbo b'leil shmini. Militbo, I should read it. So there's machlokas in the Gemara. One man diyomer, and I believe that's how we paskin, holds that tefillah b'zman mitzvah. She should go the night of the 8th, meaning the night after the 7th, and that's zmana, and therefore she's required to do so. That's a mitzvah. Now, if she doesn't do so, but rather delays her tefillah, then she's forfeited this mitzvah of tefillah b'zmana. It almost reminds you of the law of Mila. Mila B'zmana means on the 8th day. If you delay it past the 8th day, it's called Mila Shalom B'zmana. It's not the real thing. It has different dinim. Of course, the Mila is, he was Yotzi, the Mila. But there's another Mandiyama that says Tefillah B'zmana Lav Mitzvah. And according to that Mandiyama, there's nothing urgent, and she can wait to be Toveles even beyond Leil Hashmin. Just in a footnote, I would add the following comment. Even if you hold Tefillah B'zman Lav Mitzvah, she would need the reshus of her husband if she's a married woman. We're assuming now that she's a married woman. And she decides, you know what, I'm going to postpone my Tefillah. Now, within the context of a marriage and ksuba, the way the Torah envisions marriage, she can't take that. So, I'm going to remain in Niddah for the rest of my life. Okay. Now we get to an entire series of takonos that began with Rebbe, and they all deal with Niddah in our time. Rebbe made a takana called Am Shebesados. Now, what does that mean, Am Shebesados? Literally, you translate as the nation out in the fields. But what it really means is nations refers here to the Jewish nation. Sados refers to the fact that they're out there a little bit distance from the centers of Torah and yeshivas and so forth, they're a little bit out there. And they don't know the laws of Niddah. What does that mean? The most confusing part of Niddah is to determine whether or not she sees Dam Niddah or Dam Ziva, meaning whether she's a Niddah with one Re'iyah is enough, as we said, to make her into a Niddah for 7 days, or maybe she's a Zava. And all she is Shomeres Yom Keneged Yom until she sees 3 consecutive days of Dam Ziva. So the Avshim Besaros don't know the difference. They don't know that there's a whole different counting system between a Zava and a Niddah. So Rebbe made this breakthrough takana that changes everything that we know about Niddah and requires every woman who sees one Re'iyah to consider herself a Niddah. Automatic. And all the dinim of Niddah will apply after the takana of Rebbe with one Re'iyah. If we could have determined that this Re'iyah was during Yemei Ziva, she would not need to have 7 days of Tumah like a Niddah. She's not a Niddah, she's only a Zava Kana. But we can't confuse the minds of the Avshim Besaros that are out there that are somewhat ignorant and tell them, well, yeah, she may have seen it during the Yemei Ziva, and if we have to wait for the second and the third. We want to go straight. The easiest way is in a blanket, uniform way to declare that every woman who sees Dam is a Niddah. 7 days. And now we have machlokes, how to interpret Rebbe's takon. So we begin here with Rashi. Rashi says, Isha sherasa yom echad, she saw one day, Tmeya shivas yomim, kolel yemei ha're'iyah, yom ha're'iyah. So she saw on a Sunday, that Sunday becomes the first day of the 7 days. Now, if we were to consider her as a Niddah, then in a sense we get a kula. Why? Because she doesn't need Zayin Nikiyim. All she needs is 7 days. She could be flowing and seeing Dam for 7 full days. She does have Sikara at the end of the 7 days, and she goes to Mikvah the night of the 8th. But maybe she's a Zohar. What do you mean maybe she's a Zohar? She only saw one Re'iyah. Oh. Rafa Shneyam. What happens to a woman who sees 2 consecutive days? Now she's going to need another 7 days, all told 8 days. Now, why does she need another 7 days? Let's assume she's not a Zava, then we assume she's a Niddah. And if she's a Niddah, as we said before, from the first Riyah, she could be seeing the entire 7 days. It would make no difference. So why are you telling me that if she had a Riyah on the second day, we can only start counting the 7 days from day number 2. Right? We said that there are Yemei Niddah and Yemei Siva. It could be that the first Re'iyah was during Yemei Nidasa. No. Oh, the first Re'iyah was during Yemei Zivasa. The second was during Yemei Nidasa. So if the second Re'iyah, let's call it Monday, was a Re'iyah during Yemei Nidasa, we don't know, but if it were, then she has to start 7 days of Niddah from that first Monday. It's irrelevant if on Sunday she had a Re'iyah's Dam, because we're going to assume in the word, right, L'chumra, that first Re'iyah was Re'iyah Ziva. It was during Yemei Ziva. So Sunday was the last day of Yemei Ziva, and Monday is the first day of Yemei Niddah. But we cannot begin Hanidus from Sunday if Sunday was during Yemei Ziva. So she's really stuck, and it has to consider the worst case scenario that Monday was a Re'iyah's Niddah, whereas Sunday yesterday was a Re'iyah Zava. So she's got to count 7 days from Monday. She's definitely not a Zava. Don't get me wrong here, because Zava has to see 3 Re'iyos. Now we're talking about a case where she saw only 2 Re'iyos, one on Sunday and one on Monday. But the Chumrah is that we're going to require 7 days from Monday. Right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Rasa Shloshiyim. Now we get to the case where she might actually be a Zav. Now she's going to need Zayin Akiyim, and the earliest time for Zayin Akiyim will be Wednesday. Right? She saw Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So that's what he writes here. Brasa Shloshi Yomim. Sicha Lisfar Shivas Yimei Nekiyim Biyom Revi V'Elef V'Yesh Lachu Shesholosh Arios Hebimei Siva Varei Zava Gedol Sicha Lisfar On Shivas Yomim Nekiyim. So from the 4th day, she starts counting 7 days Nekiyim. Now, could you imagine, again, up in Shemayim, they know that, we don't know, but they know that Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the 3 days of our Re'iyah were during Yemei Niddah, which would mean that Saturday would be the last of 7 days, because she started on Sunday, which would allow her to go to Mikvah Motzi Shabbos, if we only knew that she was in Niddah, meaning that she was during Yemei Niddah. But since we don't know, we're going to assume the worst case scenario that it was during Yemei Ziva, which means that she needs Zayin Akiyim. So the Yisira Bosai, where Rebbe, this is based on Rashi, where he's going l'chumra in all directions. When she saw 2 Re'iyos, one on Sunday and Monday, we were going to be machmir by assuming that maybe Sunday was a Ziva and Monday was a Niddah. and therefore she could only start counting Zion from Monday. That was a chum. Now we have another chum. If she sees 3 days consecutively, we're going to assume l'chumra that she sees it during Yemei Aziva. She now becomes a Zava Gedola, and she requires Zion Nikid. If we would only have known somehow that those 3 years consecutive days were during Yemei Niddah, she would only need another 4 days. She wouldn't need Zion Nikid. Okay, so that seems to be the opinion of Rashi. Now we get to the Rashba. I think the Rashba here is representing all the other Rishonim. After Shar Rishonim, Sha'afim Rasa Yom Echad Ushnayim, Tzricha Lispar Shisha Yom Nikiv. Now this makes no sense. And yet all the Rishonim accept this Rashi. She saw 2 days. She needs Zayin Nikiv. That doesn't make any sense. Zayin Nikiv is required for a Zava Gedola. She's not a Zava Gedola. In the worst case scenario, she saw, let's say it was during Yemei Ziva. She saw 2 days during Yemei Ziva. That's only 2 days. She needs a 3rd day in order to become a Zava. Why would she need Zayin Nikiv? Shin Tira Dam Biyom Mimei Hashisha Arehi Besafek Shre'iyah Zu Mimei Niddah Arehi Tmei Shuv Shivasyon V'chein Yesh Lochu Shetira Bimei So, Cheyesh Lochu Shetira Bimei Nidasa Dam She'eno Min Hamaros Hatmeos V'Tamena Mishum She'eno Nebekiyim B'Maros Damim Varehi Svur Sha'achshav Maschilin Yemei Nidasa U'Be'emes Dam Taharhu V'Adayin Lo Hischilu Yemei Nidasa Yesh Lochu Shetira B'Yom HaShishi Dam Tamim Yehi Svura She'ena Tzricha L'Hamtenot Shivas Yomim Shekvar Schil Yemei Nidasa B'Yom HaRishon L'Riyasa U'Bemeseinu Ken El Tchilas Yemei Nidasa B'Yom HaShishi Barei Bali Dei Karis. I think we'll pick this up tomorrow. So right now we finished with Rashi and we're up to the Rashba. And the Rashba is going to explain why, even in a case where she saw 2 days consecutively, we have to be machmir and we have to consider her a zava to count Zayin Nikiv. That's what we want to analyze. We know that.